What if some ancient statues were never just statues, but something else that was turned into stone, and the only thing left today is a silent trace of what they used to be? That might sound like the kind of story you only hear late at night. The kind that mixes history with conspiracy, but here's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because there are real objects documented, studied, and displayed in museums around the world that don't behave exactly like ordinary carved stone. Take, for example, certain Egyptian statues discovered over a century ago. Some of them dated to more than 3,000 years ago, carved from extremely hard stones like diorite and granite. Materials that even today require advanced tools to shape with precision. And yet, these ancient pieces show surfaces so smooth, so controlled, that experts still debate how they were actually made with the tools officially attributed to that time. Or look at specific sculptures from the Renaissance, like those created by Gian Lorenzo Bernini in the 1600s, where marble appears almost soft, almost flexible, as if it were fabric or skin, with details so realistic that you can see the tension in fingers, the pressure against flesh, and even the illusion of blood flowing beneath the surface. Something that technically shouldn't be possible in solid stone. Now, on their own, these examples could be explained as extraordinary skill. And that is the official explanation. But when you start comparing works across different cultures and time periods, something strange begins to emerge, a pattern of statues that don't just look realistic, but look frozen, as if they captured something mid-transition. There are reports documented in various archives and archaeological notes of statues with unusually lifelike proportions, asymmetries that resemble natural human imperfection rather than artistic design, and surface textures that, under certain lighting, appear disturbingly organic. Because if these were simply carved, why do some of them carry details that would require not just artistic skill, but an almost scientific understanding of the human body that, according to mainstream history, shouldn't have existed at that level in those periods? Or is there a possibility, however small, that some of these objects are not just representations of life, but something that was once alive, altered, preserved, or transformed into stone through a process we no longer understand? If you enjoy exploring strange photos from the past and unusual discoveries, consider subscribing to the channel, because here we take a closer look at forgotten details that might change the way we see the past. If all of this were just perception, it would be easy to dismiss. To say it's just the human brain trying to find patterns where none exist, but the problem is that there are specific, documented cases that continue to be debated even today, including within archaeology itself. One of the most frequently cited examples comes from ancient Egypt, especially statues made from diorite, one of the hardest stones found in nature. A material so resistant that even with modern tools it requires significant effort to shape with precision, and yet many of these statues, dated to around 2500 BCE, display surfaces that are not only smooth but incredibly consistent, almost as if they were molded rather than carved. Some Egyptologists argue that copper tools combined with abrasives like sand could explain this level of finish, and that explanation is widely accepted, but not everyone is fully convinced. Because when you look closely at certain pieces, the symmetry, the polish, and the fine details seem to go beyond what those methods should realistically achieve. Sculptures where the body doesn't just look accurate but feels frozen in motion, where muscles appear slightly tensed, where fingers press into surfaces with visible pressure, and where expressions seem caught in a very specific moment, not idealized, not stylized, but strangely natural. This is where artists like Gian Lorenzo Bernini often enter the conversation. because his sculptures are known for making marble look soft, almost alive, with details that resemble skin, fabric, and movement, and while his work is from a much later period, it proves that stone can be pushed to imitate life in ways that are deeply convincing. Because, while Bernini's work is documented with known tools, known techniques, and a clear artistic process, many ancient statues do not come with that same level of explanation. And, in some cases, the methods used remain largely theoretical. There are also reports, some recorded in older excavation notes and museum archives, of statues showing subtle asymmetries that resemble natural human imperfections. Not the kind of balance typically emphasized in classical art, but something closer to real anatomy. Slightly uneven, slightly irregular, almost organic. Artis pointed would be easy to treat each of these statues as isolated achievements, the result of local talent, specific traditions, or cultural priorities. But that explanation starts to weaken when similar patterns begin to appear across completely different parts of the world, in places that, according to official history, had no direct contact with each other. You find highly detailed stone figures in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, all showing that same strange characteristic. An almost unsettling sense of realism, not just in anatomy, but in expression, in asymmetry. In Zaviza, stone seems to hold tension, as if something was captured rather than created. And this is where a more controversial idea begins to enter the picture. The concept of Tartaria. Now, officially, Tartaria was just a name used in old maps to describe large, unknown regions, especially in Central Asia, and there is no academic consensus that it was a unified, advanced civilization, but alternative researchers argue something very different. They suggest that Tartaria was not just a place, but a global civilization, one that had access to knowledge and techniques far beyond what we currently attribute to ancient cultures, and that this knowledge was later lost, suppressed, or rewritten in history. Because what are the chances that multiple disconnected civilizations would produce stone figures with such similar levels of precision? Such lifelike qualities, and in some cases, techniques that still raise questions today. Supporters of this theory often point to the idea that what we call ancient might not be as ancient as we think, and that some of these structures and statues could belong to a more recent but deliberately obscured past. Because when the same kind of anomaly appears again and again in different places, under different histories, it forces you to consider one possibility. By now, it's easy to feel pulled toward the more extreme explanations, because when something doesn't seem to fit, the mind naturally tries to fill the gap with bigger, more dramatic answers. But there is another way to look at all of this. One that doesn't ignore the mystery, but also doesn't jump straight into conclusions that we can't verify. Because even within what we already know, there is something important happening here. Ancient civilizations may have understood materials, tools, and techniques in ways that we still don't fully appreciate today. Not necessarily through advanced machines, but through accumulated knowledge, experimentation, and methods that were passed down, refined, and in some cases lost over time. And when knowledge is lost, what remains can feel almost impossible. Not because it was supernatural, but because the process behind it disappeared. This has happened before in history. There are known techniques in construction, metallurgy, and even art that modern experts have struggled to fully replicate without rediscovering the exact methods used at the time. So when we look at these statues, instead of asking only what if this was something else, there is another question that might be just as powerful. What exactly did they know that we no longer do? Because if even part of this precision, this realism, And this control over stone comes from techniques that were forgotten. Then what we are looking at is not just art, but evidence of knowledge that didn't survive, and that changes the perspective completely. It doesn't make the statues less impressive, it makes them more. Not as anomalies outside of history, but as reminders that history itself is incomplete, that there are layers we still haven't fully uncovered, and that what we consider impossible today might simply be something we haven't learned how to do again. So maybe the real question isn't whether these statues were once alive. Maybe the real question is, how much of the past have we misunderstood simply because we no longer have access to the way it was done? And if this kind of deeper investigation into hidden history, unanswered questions, and the details most people overlook is something that sparks your curiosity, then subscribing to the channel becomes a natural next step, because every new video continues exactly from here, exploring what doesn't quite fit and connecting pieces that, little by little, start to change the way we see the past.